Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Vicki Goodman, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Open Mind program with Miriam Feldman, author of the critically acclaimed memoir, He Came In With It, a portrait of motherhood and madness. In her compelling and powerful narrative, Miriam, or Mimi as she prefers to be called, recounts the story of her family, her husband Craig and their 4 children, and the roller coaster ride that became their reality when their teenage son Nick was diagnosed with schizophrenia. We are honored to have Mimi here with us today during National Mental Illness Awareness Week to share her journey as part of our Open Mind community lecture and film series, sponsored by the Friends of the Semel Institute and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors. Mimi Feldman is an accomplished and talented artist and writer and a dedicated mental health activist. Her Instagram handle is Mimi the Riveter, which I think tells us just how formidable an advocate she is. Mimi will be joined in discussion by Dr. Yvonne Yang, director of the Psychosis Clinic at the West Los Angeles VA, section chief of the Psychosis section of the West LA VA, and assistant clinical professor at UCLA's Semel Institute. Dr. Yang was the recipient of our Chancellor Block Friends of Semel Scholar Award in 2015. We are so proud of Yvonne and the great success she has already achieved in her career. We'd like to think that our early support during her second year of fellowship training played a small part in helping her reach this milestone. Following Mimi and Yvonne's discussion, we have reserved time for your questions, which we ask that you please type into the Q&A located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Time permitting, we will get to as many questions as possible. Today's program, which will run for 1 hour, is being taped and will be available for viewing tomorrow on our YouTube channel, which can be found on our website, friendsofthesemelinstitute.org. There you will also find a library of videos from past Open Mind programs, a calendar of upcoming events, and information about our Friends Scholar program that supports the research of early career neuroscientists at UCLA, like Dr. Yvonne Yang. And now let's get started. Please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Mimi Feldman. Thank you so much.
Hello. I have to say it is really an honor to be here. I've gone to and watched on Zoom so many events here, and to be part of one is really fantastic. I'm going to start out by reading a small part from my book from the beginning, but before I thought I'd show you a couple pictures of Nick so you have an idea in your mind. This is Nick when he was a little boy, probably about 7, as you can see, full of light and life as he could be. And this is Nick as a teenager, an older teenager. He had already been diagnosed at this point. And he used to hang out on the street near where we live on Larchmont in the daytime and just watch the people going by. And this last picture is Nick now. He's in his mid-30s and he lives up here in Washington State with me and with my husband and myself in his own apartment. So this is my book. He came in with it. And I'm going to just do a quick little read from the beginning to give you an idea of how this all started. I guess there were signs. There had to have been signs. I missed them all. So where does this story begin? Damned if I know exactly. I had me a son. I had a fat little baby boy with a mouth like a rubber band. My husband Craig and I surfed the labor waves together like champs. When my son came out of me, the room was oddly hushed. He was my first, so I didn't know what to expect. But it sure was quiet in there. No slap and cry, no nothing. Nick was blue and cold when he was born. We waited in the delivery room for his inaugural wail and heard only silence. Don't worry, dear, the nurse said. We just have to warm him up a bit. They placed him in an apparatus that looked like a toaster oven. Everything in the room seemed cold, frozen, My husband and I each held our breath, and finally, our son took his first, and we let ours go. I had my boy. Deep, dark eyes and a serious composure. All the fingers, all the toes. We named him Samuel as we had planned, but then after a day or two, Craig and I renamed him Nicholas, Nick. I'd had a beloved uncle with that name, so that was fine with me. Craig gave him the middle name Dylan, after Bob. Nick, a normal, healthy boy. He was strong, he was adorable, and his future was as bright as the goddamn sun. I would loll around and stare at that future of his like a baby myself, entranced with jangling keys. Now, Nick sits in a dark room all day, each day, and I wonder, what is he thinking? Who is in there? I see how people look at him. I can read my family's faces. I know what has happened to him is a tragedy. But to me, he is still in there, and his future is still ablaze, alone in his filthy apartment that I try to keep clean. So that's kind of a sad starting point, but there is a lot of sadness in this story, and there's no point ignoring it. I was kind of a typical urban mom running a business, 4 young kids, running around, very busy all the time. And I spent the first 10 or 15 years of motherhood obsessing about child abductions, car accidents, and childhood cancer. And then out of left field came serious mental illness, the last thing that I had on my radar or even knew how to identify. Serious mental illness is like a gale force hurricane that blows through your life, leaving anything that's not nailed down just gone. You have to really kind of start from scratch. You don't know which side is up, really. If you were to make a list of red flags for serious mental illness and a list of normal teenage behavior, you'd have virtually the same list. They all act crazy. They're all irrational, impulsive, oppositional. He really didn't seem any different than any of the other kids, but time went on and the other kids seemed to be growing out of these issues, and Nick wasn't. He started having problems in school and problems with his grades, and he spent a lot of time in his room, and eventually there was a suicide attempt, at which point we knew this was serious. The suicide attempt was deemed inauthentic by the doctor, which means I think it was just a trying to get attention, but it worked and he got our attention. The problem was we spent probably 2 or 3 years going to psychologists. At first we thought it was a drug abuse problem. We spent a year with drug rehab. Then he was diagnosed with anxiety. After anxiety came depression. After depression came bipolar. And finally, when he was 19, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. At which point we embarked into the world that we're living in now. And as we talk more tonight, this points to a really important issue, which is the issue of early intervention and early identification. And I think too many parents have no sense or any idea of what to look for and what to take seriously in their kids' behaviors. And if you can intervene early and you don't waste 2-3 years thinking it's a drug problem or a different kind of problem, I think the outcomes can be much, much better. You know, I had a hard time in the beginning because I am kind of what I call pathologically functional. Whatever happens, I pop up like the Energizer Bunny and I take care of business and I don't let anything stop me. And that can be a good characteristic, but it also can work against you. And with me, it really did. This whole event, as is chronicled in the book, wreaked havoc in my entire family. And I think the beginning point of the deconstruction of my family was my inability to just admit that something was wrong and attend to it that way. I was convinced that if everybody would just leave me alone, I would be able to fix this. And so I went through a long period of time pretending nothing was wrong, hiding things from the neighbors, from friends, from family members, walking around with, I still had two younger girls. My older daughter was in college, my younger ones were still at home. And I would just pretend that nothing was wrong and everything was okay, which I think made them pretty crazy on their own. And one of the things that I used to do was I would hide and I would wait till everything was done at the end of the night. And then I would hide in the bathroom and run the shower and lie on the floor and cry. Because I was mourning, I was mourning the loss of this son who was not who I thought he was and whose future was so much in question at that point. And one night I came out of the bathroom and there was my daughter and I was busted. I mean, I was clearly crying. And she said to me, "Mom, what's the matter? Why are you crying?" And I said, "I'm crying because I miss your brother." And she said, "What do you mean you miss my brother? Nick's not gone. Nick's still here." And I said, "Yes, but he's not who he was supposed to be." And she looked at me and she said, "Yeah, he is. It's just not what you thought." She flounced off to her room and shut the door. And I sat down in the window seat and it was like a frying pan that hit me on the head. I had a real epiphany and I realized that she was right. I was spending all this time and all this angst mourning something I thought I had lost. And I realized that this was my son. This is how he came to us. We may not have been able to identify it or see it at the time, but this is the son that I gave birth to. And I damn well better learn how to be his mother instead of lying around with my head on my pillow moaning because he isn't what I thought he was going to be. And, that moment with my daughter is something that I have carried with me now, 20 some odd years later. I still have to come back to that. And I still have to remember that this is Nick. This is how he came to us. And he's not different than what he was supposed to be. He is who he was supposed to be. And this leads me to a bigger issue that I talk about often, which is these people with schizophrenia, 1% of the population, not a small number. This is a lot of people on this planet. And that's just schizophrenia. People with different serious mental illnesses and different mental illnesses. We treat people with serious mental illness like lepers. We have not created a place for them in our society. They're relegated to the streets and the prisons as the de facto mental health care facilities. And this has to change. I feel so strongly that this is not us as a society doing them a favor, or you as a society doing me, his mother, a favor. They have as much a right to a place in our world, in our culture, as we do. Who are we to say that people with these differences don't have a place in our world? So writing the book was my way of, as openly and honestly as I could, telling the story not just of Nick, but of the family and the mental health system and his sisters, and just us as a component, as a family in this world, in this culture that we all share, in the hopes that people would see that all around you are families like me, and all around you are people like Nick, and they have as much a right to a place in our world as anybody else. So that's kind of what I have to say. At this point, I'll invite Yvonne in and we can have our conversation.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Yang. Thank you so much to the Friends of Semel for having me here today. It's truly an honor, and it's an honor to speak with you, Mimi, and to talk about your very beautiful book. I just wanted to make a few comments about it, which are that it was so incredibly powerful to hear really your mother's love come through so strongly, and your struggles in helping your son through the changes in his life and the changes in your family. I found the book incredibly honest and poetic, and I do hope that anyone in this audience who hasn't read it yet does get the chance. I was hoping we could start with maybe the most difficult question of all. It's the question that you actually call the dreaded question, which is, how is Nick doing today?
Well, actually, Nick is doing well today. A year ago, I would have dreaded the question. And at any given time in the last 20 years, it could be one way or the other. But right now, Nick lives in his own apartment, not far from us. We live kind of out in the country. He lives in the town in Washington where we live. He has his own apartment. He is stable on his medication. Up here in Washington, we have access to DHS workers. So he has actually a caregiver that comes every day and makes sure he takes his medication and helps him keep his place clean. And that was a big issue because, I mean, for 20 years, it was me twice a day to his house, making sure he takes those meds. And the really big difference, other than his circumstances, is that about a year and 3 months ago, Nick started a new medication called Clozapine, and it has been a game changer. I would say that he is 60% back in the world with us. Now, that's not to say that he's going to be, running any big corporations or, graduating with his PhD tomorrow. But I mean, I've lived for 15 years with my son not here with us, with him in some irretrievable place.
Right.
And he's connected and he's here and he's remembering things and he smiles and he laughs and he gets joy out of life. And the big exciting thing is he's also painting again. So I couldn't be happier and more grateful to Clozapine, which is a drug which is kind of been shoved into the back corner and needs to be put out in the daylight, because it's really the only medication that offers meaningful recovery from schizophrenia.
Thank you so much for sharing about that. I was going to ask if you felt like there had been anything in particular that helped turn things around for Nick, and it sounds like you feel that Clozapine has been that for him. I want to let the audience know that in the thank you email, we will send some links about topics that we discussed today, including about Clozapine. And as a psychiatrist practicing here in Los Angeles with a specialty in psychosis, I agree with you completely. It's a national tragedy that Clozapine is underutilized in the United States to the degree that it is, and we are far, far behind other developed countries such as the UK, Finland, who more than a quarter of their patients with the diagnosis of schizophrenia are on Clozapine, and here in the United States, it's anywhere from 2 to 5%, depending on what state one might be living in. I'm so glad to hear you found out about Clozapine. How did you gain access to this medication and to this kind of treatment?
Well, I was having a conversation with Ellen Sachs, who I'm sure everybody knows, and she asked me what medication Nick was on, and I told her, and she said, you really ought to try Clozapine. It's the game changer. And then after the book was published and I started networking all around the country with other moms, over that year, I met 3 other mothers with adult sons who said the same thing to me. And I thought finally, we have to do this. And I was put in touch with a doctor. His name is Dr. Robert Laitman, and he's in New York. And he is a warrior for Clozapine and for helping people with serious mental illness. And I could go on and on forever. I'm not going to, but I have put the links, which will be in the letter afterwards if anybody is interested. But Dr. Laitman brought Nick back to the world, and I will be grateful to him forever for that.
That's amazing. And I'm just so happy to hear that Nick is painting again. It just must mean so much to you and your family and to him. I was wondering if you could talk more about the difference in the healthcare systems in Washington versus California. What did you want? Were you hoping for out of the mental health system? And what does Washington give you that California didn't? And what more could you still want?
Okay, let's roll it back. First of all, the differences between Washington and California are not that different. It's just that I live in a small town now and it's not as overburdened, so we were able to get the DHS workers. The bottom line is that the entire mental health system in this entire country is a disaster. To call it a disaster is a compliment. It really is almost non-functional. You know, when I said before that the prisons and the streets have become the de facto mental health facilities, I'm not kidding. Right. There are all kinds of statistics about how many mentally ill people are in those prisons and are on the streets. There are not enough beds. There is not good sustainable treatment. There is not AOT, which is the assisted outpatient treatment, which gives more wraparound care. It needs to be basically redone from the ground up. I mean, I can't say that more strongly. When all this started, I could not believe what I was dealing with. You know, I was down this rabbit hole with having a son with serious mental illness, and 50% of my energy was spent beating my head against the wall with this crazy system that doesn't help you. And as far as schizophrenia specifically, I think there needs to be a paradigm shift in terms of how providers and medicine looks at this. My experience has been with schizophrenia is that the main thrust of treatment is to mitigate the positive symptoms, to take away the paranoia, the violence, the anger, the things that sort of disrupt the world around you. And as soon as those symptoms are mitigated, the doctors are done. They call that a success. They're perfectly happy to have Nick sit in a dark apartment for the rest of his life, as long as he's not punching holes in the wall or causing any problems or outside screaming on the balcony. Well, I'm Nick's mother, and I'm sure there are thousands, millions of other Nick's mothers out there to whom that is not good enough. We don't take people with cancer and treat them that way. We don't take people with other debilitating diseases and treat them that way. This is like somebody with some sort of physical disability, not giving them physical therapy and just sitting them in a wheelchair and saying, good enough. And that has to change.
Mm-hmm. I think what I hear you saying is that you'd like to see a healthcare system that wasn't really about the bottom line as much as it was about helping patients actually achieve their true potential and reach their personal goals, which I agree with you completely that we don't have. And as a physician in the mental health profession, I would deeply like to see it change as well. Speaking of other mothers, do you have messages that you want to share with other mothers around the world?
Well, you know, one of the most profound things about writing this book is, I started writing it because in the first few years, this was 20 years ago, so it was before the internet was so prevalent. It was certainly before there were Facebook groups for mothers of kids with schizophrenia. I mean, I thought I was the only person in the world, and there was nobody for me to talk to. And that was my impetus for writing the book, is I thought, I gotta write this story. There's gotta be other moms need to know they're not the only ones. I used to sit in my nice big old house in Hancock Park and look out the window, you know, the 100-year-old wavy glass, and see people walking up down the street. And I felt like I was on an island. I felt like I was on an island, and behind my front door was something dirty and ugly that I had to hide. And it was a real learning curve. And it took a long time. And I do have to give a shout out to NAMI here, because if it wasn't for the NAMI Family to Family program, which is their educational seminar that they do, which to all mothers, fathers, anybody having a loved one dealing with this, get in your car and go to your closest NAMI and sign up for Family to Family. It is indispensable. But I used to feel like I was just alone in this scary, dark, dirty place. And it is scary and dark sometimes, but it's not dirty and there's nothing to be ashamed of. And we need to help each other. And we need to tell our stories and we need to talk about it. And since I've written this book, I get letters daily from mothers all over the country and actually all over the world saying, thank you so much. And it's not because my book is the first book about, written by a mother with a son with schizophrenia, but I don't pull any punches and I don't make myself look like a hero. If anything, it's certainly not a how-to book. If anything, it's a how not to book. But I just thought, let's just get real. I mean, we've got to stop wasting time pretending this is something it isn't.
Let's talk about what helped you get through this experience and helps you now every day. What would you say the things are that you rely on and came to rely on?
Well, first of all, it's my children, Nick's sisters are glorious, and they suffered, I mean, they went through trauma. His youngest sister was 9 when all this started, and they each had their own trauma around it, that they're all young women now and they're working through it. But in the beginning, honestly, there were times when if it was just Nick and me, I don't know what I would have done. I had Thelma and Louise visions of Nick and I driving off the Grand Canyon because I thought it would put him out of his misery. It would put me out of my misery. And the only thing that kept me grounded and kept me going was I had other children to take care of. And that kept me grounded. And then eventually, as the years went by, I astoundingly found myself with a yoga and meditation practice, which is something that I never in a million years thought I would do. But I just fell into it and it saved me. And I won't go on and on about it. But the one thing that I think is important, that I think any other mom or parent or loved one can hold on to this, you don't have to be a yoga practitioner, is the idea of surrender. I always regarded surrender as waving the white flag and losing the war. It was a sign of weakness. It was giving up. And that went against my whole personal, the way I'm wired. And what I learned through yoga and through the sutras and the reading that I did is that surrender is not failure. Surrender is intelligence. Surrender is knowing when there is something that you cannot change and accepting it and moving forward around it, through it, next to it, whatever you have to do, but stop trying to change it. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to my daughter saying, yeah, he is. It's just not what you thought. Is that acceptance. And then once you accept what is and what is unchangeable, the options are endless for how do you respond to that and how do you live with it and what do you do with it. And that helped me a lot.
Can we switch topics for one moment? The cover of your book is a very beautiful painting of Nick. When is that your painting? And when did you make that painting, if it is?
That's actually a painting Nick did. Oh. He did that. It's a self-portrait that he did when he was 16.
Amazing.
Yeah. If anybody wants to see it.
I see.
And when we got to that point with the book, I'm an artist, so there was some talk of, well, I should be doing the book cover. I didn't really want to because I felt like I'm the writer. I don't want to be the book cover designer. And we got book covers designed, and then we realized this is the only thing that it could be. I think that it's an important picture. I think there's a certain prescient look in his eye in a sense that something's not right. And I also am so proud to put this piece of work of Nick, and he was very proud too, that it's on the book. So that's how that happened.
Wonderful. Wow. In your book, there's a bit of a sense of things turning around, like through the journey, the turmoil, and then of your family coming out intact on the other side. And I was wondering if you could speak about the key turning points for your family as a whole and what helped hold things together as a family?
We didn't do a great job. It was pretty bad. And honestly, we tried, the girls went to some therapy, I did the family to family, but we were just stumbling. And I think that the thing that really held us together, it sounds corny, but it's love. It's that we freaking love each other and nothing's going to shake that. And, I look at these, when I go to meetings and things like that, or give talks, and I look around and, rarely, it's 75% moms, maybe, but much fewer percentage of dads are even at those things. And I'm not saying that as a criticism to the dads. It's just that the dads have a whole other pathos about it. And a lot of times it's them pulling back. But then you also see it ruins so many marriages. And I did reach a point where I looked all around me and my life was a disaster and everything was blowing up. And I just kind of did this, wait a minute, I didn't work this hard and come this far for all these people to just blow apart and be miserable. And so that was my turning point. But I think the turning point was that these girls love their brother fiercely, and his father loves him fiercely, and we're a family and we take it seriously, warts and all. And I think one of the things that I didn't do, but I would recommend to other families, that is something that I came up with years later, was one of the things that was a big problem was, especially with the younger girls, was that they just got lost in the shuffle. One kid's on fire, you're going to be constantly carrying water. And so the girls just kind of got overlooked, especially my youngest. She really didn't get good mom. She didn't get the same mom the other kids got. If I had it to do all over again, I would pick a friend, a family friend, an aunt, something like that. And I would have asked them to become each one of my daughter's surrogate moms. So each kid had a surrogate parent that they could turn to when I was busy either putting Nick out on fire or having a nervous breakdown myself, so that they weren't unseen and unheard. And I think that that's a really doable kind of thing and would help a lot, because I think we don't talk enough about and don't pay enough attention to the effect that all this has on the siblings.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that advice. And to me, that just speaks to how overwhelming the experience was for you as a mother, and just how all-consuming it was in terms of the amount of energy you needed to put into helping Nick through these day-to-day moments and through finding treatment for him. I was wondering if we could talk as well about the role of your friends in your life. You talked a little bit in the book about how you wish you had found a circle of friends to support you earlier. How did you find this circle of support?
Well, it wasn't even so much of I wish I had found a circle of friends. I had them. I just didn't let them in. And you see, that's the thing. That's the thing about the stigma and the embarrassment and the weirdness of mental illness. It was, they were right there. I just kept it to myself for a long, long time. And the minute I did start letting people in, they were there for me, of course. And also, the minute I started talking about it, I realized that virtually everybody has some mental illness in their life or in their families. You can't throw a rock without hitting somebody who's dealing with this. And not only you can't throw that rock, but my experience is everybody is dying to talk about this. I'm a person who I made it my purpose to be open about it and talk about it. As a matter of fact, my youngest Rose used to do imitation of me. She would say, "Look, this is mom," and she told the phone and she'd say, hi, my name is Miriam Feldman and I have a son with schizophrenia. But that's how I was. I would always say that out loud. And I will say it when I call somebody, that the phone company or the bank or something, if we're dealing with something, and I'll say, my son has schizophrenia and this is what happened because of it. Can we fix it? And before I end up hanging up, the person on the other end is telling me about their father who has schizophrenia. So we need to start the dialogue. We need not to be afraid to talk about it because everybody's dying to talk about it.
I agree completely. And there's so much evidence of how negatively stigma impacts the lives of people with mental illness and their ability to get access to the treatment that they need. It's a little earlier than we said that we would. Thank you so much for answering so many of my questions, by the way. But I was wondering, I see a lot of questions in the Q&A. I see 23 so far. And I was wondering if Vicki wanted to pop on and maybe we could try answering some of these.
Your timing is impeccable, Yvonne. Okay. I was starting to see the number of questions and I thought, I think we better jump in now because so many people have questions. But before I get to them, I want to take this opportunity to thank you both. Mimi, your book is a gift to the mental health community and you are the most eloquent and thought-provoking advocate. And I think you made all of us think about what the world situation is now for people with mental health issues and their families. So thank you and keep up the incredible work. We all need you. We really need you. And Yvonne, I feel so honored that the Friends were able to help you jumpstart your career a little bit because you are brilliant and thoughtful and compassionate and everything that we need in a psychiatrist treating people with schizophrenia and other mental health concerns. So thank you both. We're going to get to the questions. There are quite a few questions about Clozapine. From Norm and several other people. Why is the drug termed as a game changer prescribed for 25% of the world's people living with schizophrenia, but prescribed for only 2 to 5% of people in the United States? Why are we behind? Why?
Wow, that's a big question. So one of the there are many, many barriers. They occur at the healthcare system level, they occur at the individual provider level, and they occur at the patient level. Some of the main barriers are because Clozapine is our most effective antipsychotic, but it also carries the highest side effect burden. And because of one side effect in particular, it's regulated under a special monitoring program by the FDA, in which patients who start on Clozapine have to get their blood drawn every week. And in order for them to continue getting their Clozapine supply, certain of their blood levels have to be within a certain range just to make sure that they're safe. And as a result, many physicians, many psychiatrists and other prescribers across the country have become very reluctant to prescribe Clozapine. Most don't really feel comfortable using it. And most don't offer it to their patients, even though it is really the most effective antipsychotic we have, especially for treatment-resistant schizophrenia. There may also be cultural issues at play. In a highly individualistic society, the United States actually regulates Clozapine monitoring more closely and to a greater extent than any other country. So other countries, you do a weekly blood draw for 18 weeks and then it's monthly after that. But here in the United States, it's weekly for 6 months, then bi-weekly for 6 months, then monthly after that. In other words, the burdens are greater here than in other countries. And some of that could be driven by culture, and some of that also is related to how litigious the United States is.
I'd like to add something to that, if that's okay.
Please do, yes.
This is all true. But the point being, the side effect that has caused this drug to be categorized this way is, although it may be fatal, which is what scares everybody, is 100% avoidable if you do the blood work. Absolutely. So nobody's going to accidentally die from taking Clozapine as long as you're doing the blood work. Right. I think the problem arises in that you're dealing with people with schizophrenia, it's hard enough to get them to take their meds, let alone to show up for blood work each week.
Right.
But without going too deeply into it, if you look into Dr. Robert Laitman and his book, which is Meaningful Recovery from Schizophrenia with Clozapine, he has a protocol now where he heads off most of these side effects at the pass. And not only that, they now have a home blood stick thing that you can use to do that test. So it's getting easier. It's a matter of educating people to how the situation has changed in order to bring this drug more to people in the United States.
I agree completely. And I'm thrilled that you're advocating for access to this drug in your forums and talking about it through Nick. Yeah.
Thank you both. From Janet, Mimi, your book was very much like my experience and I read it straight through. Thank you, Mimi. Did your son accept that he was mentally ill or did he fight the label? And I think this is a very important question. She goes on to say her son knows the stigma of mental illness and has said, I don't want to be labeled disabled. Can you both comment on this? Because I know this is a common problem.
Well, there's two things there in what you said. One thing is anosognosia, which is the inability to know that you're sick. And that is, if you think about it in layman's terms, the very organ that would allow you to understand that you're sick is the organ that's afflicted, your brain. So that's anosognosia. It sounds to me, though, like what Janice is talking about is her son is aware that he has a mental illness. He just doesn't want people to know about it. And Nick's kind of the same way too. I mean, we talk about it with the doctors and everything, but he prefers to call it anxiety issues or, something like that. And the bottom line is, I think, just call it what you want. Let's just treat it and give you the best life you can get. And if saying schizophrenia is distasteful or, makes her son feel bad, then don't say it. I mean, I don't think it changes the situation. Do you?
No, and
Yeah.
I've said this many times
Yeah.
that my mentor, Steve Martyr, does not really believe diagnoses are useful in clinical treatment. I think we treat the person in front of us is who we treat. And the problem is a lot of words such as schizophrenia, for instance, are just burdened with so much stigma that it's really painful for somebody to, why would anybody want to apply that word to themselves, right? It's very, very understandable. And so how can we reduce stigma when it comes to mental illness? First of all, I think things are changing. Things have changed a lot, even in the years since I started medical school and was contemplating becoming a psychiatrist, which at the time, it seemed kind of serious, like to make a decision like that. And now psychiatry is one of the most popular fields to apply into. And I take that to be a good sign that among the younger generation, there's less stigma. And for patients, similarly, I just think people feel more comfortable talking about it. And the more we talk about it with others, the less stigma there will be. And it's about education. Yeah.
Thank you both. Question for Mimi from Anne. Did you see, now looking back now, did you see signs that your son was different as a little boy, or did you see any signs?
No, Nick was, I mean, I hate to say it, but he was the perfect little boy. I mean, he spun the world on the tip of his finger. He was happy and joyful, and he's a prodigious artist. I mean, very early identified as having prodigious talent. And he got along with everybody, and he had a good heart. I mean, no, there was nothing. The only thing I can point to is possibly as he got into his teenage years, some amount of anxiety. But, this is not unusual for schizophrenia. There are some people with schizophrenia who there's problems really early and it shows early on, but that's the exception. Most of these kids have perfectly average, I mean, not perfect lives, but average lives until mid to late teens when this happens. And that's when it derails.
Yvonne, did you want to add anything to that?
I agree completely. Yeah.
There are a few questions here about patients that are resistant to treatment, not wanting to take their medications. There's a question from Marina and several other people about medication and also about going to therapy. Does your son go to therapy? Is it helpful to him? Wonder if you could comment on medication and therapy.
Okay, I'll comment shortly, and then I want Yvonne to comment on this one too. But yes, of course he's resistant. I mean, early on when he was a young teenager and they thought it was bipolar, and they first gave him his first prescription, and he wasn't going to take that. And I was told early on by a doctor, look, forget everything that you think you know about being a parent. All bets are off. All that matters is getting this medication into your son every day. So I paid him to take it. And I remember standing in the kitchen and his two younger sisters looking at me with such betrayal. Nobody had ever paid them to take their amoxicillin. And there I was paying Nick $10 a day to take his meds. But it's just, my advice to other parents is do anything and everything you can. Bribe them, trick them, anything. And I mean, maybe that's something that Yvonne wouldn't necessarily endorse, but as a mom, that's my position. Do whatever you can to get the medication into them. Now, as far as the rest of that question, I think I'll let the doctor talk a little bit.
Sure. First of all, Mimi, I fully support your approach. And the reason I say that is because we also have a saying in psychiatry, which is that the best medication, especially the best antipsychotic for your patient, is the one that they will take. It is completely irrelevant if you are giving your son the best option that we have and they flush it down the toilet, or they cheek it and they spit it out behind the bushes. So whatever can be done to help support. So what we call medication adherence, meaning the willingness of somebody to and desire for somebody to take their medication, is one of the biggest issues, certainly in the treatment of schizophrenia today. So what are our strategies? Especially in young people, it's hard because they don't want to take a pill because it signifies that they're sick. Maybe to them, in their minds, it confirms their diagnosis could be true. And a lot of people don't like how these pills make them feel in terms of the side effects, especially. So family is incredibly important, like yourself, Mimi, even just encouraging patients and telling them this will make you feel better. This is helpful to you in the long run, number one. Number two, for a therapist and a clinician and a prescriber, it's really important to collaborate with your patient. You cannot be dismissive of side effects. You have to work with them and you have to let them know this is a long road. We're going to try a lot of options and we won't necessarily find the best one right away, but I'm here with you. We're going to make these decisions together. If you don't like it, we'll try something different, right? Number three, especially when we talk about really important medications like clozapine and long-acting injectables. Long-acting injectables are a really important category of medications that are in many cases more effective than oral medications because they are basically like a person is taking the pill at exactly the right time of day every single day, right? When they get the injection. These are injections they get every month. It's real. There's some research studies showing that asking your patients more questions and sort of following up why they don't want to do it is really important, and really getting at the source of their resistance to taking medication, as opposed to just saying, oh, you said no, okay, let's just not pursue it any further. It's really important to kind of get at the root cause of why somebody doesn't want to take their medication. For instance, in some cases, it might be because a side effect is uncomfortable to talk about, like a sexual side effect. And if that's the problem, changing to a different medication could easily solve that problem, and you might miss out on that opportunity if you didn't ask exactly down to the root cause of why they're resisting. Therapy for patients with serious mental illness can be so incredibly helpful. Even though I'm a psychiatrist, and so I think society as a whole views my role as primarily prescribing medications, I don't think that somebody's treatment regimen is really complete unless there's a therapy of psychosocial intervention and therapy to it. So there are a couple different kinds of therapy that I think can be so useful. One is cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis. And I remember when I first learned about it, I was so shocked that there could be CBT for something like psychosis, but it can be so effective at helping reduce the distress associated with delusions and auditory hallucinations. And then our patients and families who have serious mental illness should have therapists for depression, for anxiety, to help with relationship problems, to help them achieve their personal goals. All these things have been shown to be incredibly beneficial and, in my view, are necessary.
And you know what I have to say, in my experience of 20 years of this, I've yet to have a doctor offer therapy as part of Nick's treatment. He's never had a therapist. They don't, I mean, with schizophrenia, therapy is not a thing that's generally on the table.
Right. And I will say, historically, there was this idea that it could be almost dangerous for somebody with schizophrenia to, say, enter analysis, that it could worsen their delusions. But the data nowadays really doesn't support that. And especially if you're talking about supportive therapy, dynamic psychotherapy, helping interpret auditory hallucinations, or cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis, these are all evidence-based modalities now. Yeah.
Thank you both. Question from Joan. How do you get a child help who doesn't think he has a brain chemistry issue and feels that others have physically and emotionally abused him? How do you cajole a child to seek help when a child thinks others are the ones with issues?
I would like to say one thing real quick, and then I'll let you, because I know you know more about it. But there's a book by Javier Amador, which is called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. And he enumerates the LEAP method. He has a whole methodology. It's all about exactly that question, and it's indispensable. So I recommend that to everybody. But now, Yvonne, why don't you say what you have to say?
No, please. This sounds like I should read that book.
Yeah, you probably should. It's pretty
Yes, yeah. The truth is I don't have a very good answer. And this, again, is where we as clinicians operate in these giant gaps in the mental health care system. There's just a constant tension between someone's autonomy and what helps keep them safe, right? And in that tension and in that gap, a lot of terrible things can happen and people are traumatized. And that includes, being given shots to help them calm down in the emergency room. That includes being picked up by the police and arrested because of behavior when they were in the middle of an episode. And that includes feeling overly sedated. It includes being hospitalized and feeling trapped. So I wish I had more answers. I do think that with time, this may or may not be comforting. In my experience now, with enough years, patients can develop an understanding of the relationship between their illness and not taking medication. And it can take around 10 years at times, right? It can take multiple hospitalizations, but eventually insight does often develop.
Thank you. Several questions here about HIPAA. And after turning 18, when parents are not able, they don't have the decision-making power. And this is actually a question to Mimi. Are you doing anything to help make changes in HIPAA?
Yeah, wherever and however I can. I've had to make certain choices about where I'm focusing my energies, but this is something that I thoroughly support. The HIPAA laws are one of the most detrimental things in this whole equation, and unfairly used and unfairly applied. Because if you have a parent who has dementia, the doctors will cooperate with you, they will talk to you, they will tell you what's going on. If you have a kid with schizophrenia who's over 18, it's a whole other story. And so I think some of it is cultural, some of it has to do with this idea of civil liberties. Yes, the laws absolutely have to change. But one thing that I would say is, in my experience with all of this, I've been able to get around the HIPAA Because the thing is, if you have a good doctor and that doctor wants to help, I sort of have found my own little language around things of saying things like, well, I'm going to ask you a question, and if you don't answer me, I'm going to assume that the answer is no. And, you know, little code kind of things like that you can do that will help. But I do understand that the HIPAA is a huge, huge problem when you've got a kid that's in the hospital and they won't tell you where he is or what's going on. And then they, every week I hear a story from a mom who they, you know, discharged the kid in the middle of the night into the snow. And it's one of the most important things that needs to change is that. And there are a lot of people advocating and working for it on a legislative level. And if you're interested or want to, all you have to do is Google that stuff. And there's a million places you can put your energies and sign your name and help, because this does need to change.
Early on, we had an author, Pete Early, who wrote a book about, nodding your head, about his son who he brought him to the emergency room and the son would not stay. And they said he was not a danger to himself or others. They let him go. And then he immediately committed a crime, which was really all he did was break into a house and take a bath. And the son then went to jail. So the parent couldn't get him to stay because of the HIPAA, to stay in the hospital. So a book to read. A comment from Jackie. I'd like to thank Dr. Martyr, Steve Martyr, who Yvonne mentioned and who has been a frequent speaker for the Friends, and the Semel Institute for prescribing Clozapine for my daughter 2.5 years ago. Thank you to Mimi for helping other moms deal with struggles. You are a wonderful advocate, Mimi. We have time for one last question, and it's regarding siblings. When you have a sibling who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, is there a genetic component here? Yvonne.
I'll let you take that, Yvonne.
Yeah, schizophrenia can occur spontaneously, but it actually is a highly heritable disease. Among monozygotic twins, the likelihood of one twin having schizophrenia, if the other one does, is about 50%. And for siblings, it's about 25%. So we, unfortunately though, there isn't just one gene that we've been able to identify, or even just a handful of genes. Schizophrenia is what we know as what we call very polygenic, meaning many, many genes, probably hundreds, go into an individual's likelihood of having the disorder. So we haven't figured out how to predict it yet, but yes, it definitely has a heritable component to it.
Well, I want to thank you both. Unfortunately, we are out of time. This was really such an informative conversation. I'm very, very grateful to both of you for taking the time from your very busy schedules to educate our audience, and Mimi for bringing us into your family and sharing your very personal story with all of us. It makes us all better people to have listened to your brave story. And
thank you for having me.
Well, we're very grateful to you. And Yvonne, thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with all of us. You are a compassionate, wonderful doctor, and we are very blessed to have you at UCLA. I want to thank everybody who has participated in this webinar. We look forward to seeing you at our next Open Mind, which will be on October 19th, when we welcome the author Patty Davis. And it will be a conversation about Alzheimer's and dementia and caregiving. So please join us 5 p.m. October 19th, and stay well, stay safe, and have a good evening. Thank you both. Thank you, everyone. Good night.